Hello, Endeavor here. What is the root word of liberalism? Liberty, the state of being free to do as one pleases. Liberty is a concept which obviously long predates the Enlightenment, but it was one of the major areas of focus of Enlightenment thinkers. What really is liberty is up for debate. It could differ depending on who you ask, but the most common understanding of liberty held in the West today was largely influenced by the Enlightenment. Though there was some variation from one thinker to another as to what actually constitutes liberty. For example, John Locke considered liberty to be the upholding of natural rights, the consent of the governed, equality under the law, and religious toleration. Generally, this definition of liberty is used to limit the authority that the state has over the individual. Jean-Jacques Rousseau took the concept of liberty further. He's famous for the phrase, "Man is born free and everywhere he is in chains." Liberty was the natural state of man, according to Rousseau, and it was civilization that took away his liberty. Having given up his natural freedom, Rousseau believed that man should be governed by the general will, since it's the only legitimate limitation to freedom. According to Rousseau, to be free is to be able to do as you please, and society becomes freer the more restrictions upon people's actions are removed. Under the modern liberal paradigm, Locke's definition is closer to the classic liberal conception of liberty, while Rousseau's definition is closer to the progressive liberal one. However, both are derived from the Enlightenment. For a coherent definition of liberty, I'll go with the one put forth by John Stuart Mill, a post-Enlightenment liberal philosopher, in his essay On Liberty, because Mill was very influential on modern liberal thought. I've already addressed the first half of Mill's essay, which was about free speech, in part 3 of this series on the marketplace of ideas. So here I'll look at the second half of the essay. Mill places the liberty of the individual as the most important aspect of a free society. He argues that the individual should be as free as possible to pursue their own interests, as long as they are not doing harm to others. Mill believed that the government could only be used to punish someone if they were doing harm to someone else or neglecting their responsibility to them, but not to themselves. He argues for tolerance, claiming that the majority should make laws they'd accept if they themselves were the minority. This would avoid what he refers to as the tyranny of the majority. Mill accepts that morality exists which individuals are expected to follow, but he believes that society shouldn't get involved in it. It should only deal with the individual's relation to the public, not their private lives. Mill said the individual should be free to harm themselves through vice. He said that the promotion of vice could be prohibited, but something that's only offensive shouldn't be prohibited. Where he draws the line is unclear. Mill, however, does not apply his principles of liberty to less civilized people, whom he argues can be ruled by despotism until they become civilized. This definition of liberty is generally in line with that held by Western liberal democracies today, with the exception of Mill's opinion on uncivilized people. So what is wrong with the liberal conception of liberty? First of all, am I even for liberty? Leftists, classical liberals, and libertarians have levied the accusation against me that I'm a fascist who's against liberty and freedom. And when they say fascist, they mean it as a pejorative. But I reject the notion that I'm against liberty. However, I fundamentally disagree with the liberal conception of what liberty really is. Because liberalism boils liberty down to the individual's freedom to do. That people are freer based on what they're free to do with as little limits from authority as possible. And this is my major disagreement. Liberty does not come from what you are allowed to do at any given moment. Liberty comes from order. People feel the most free when they have a sense of normalcy and stability. That they are accustomed to the culture and morality of the society around them and that they feel in place. These are the conditions in which people feel that they have liberty. Thus, a free society is one that upholds the order in which people feel contented. There's many problems that stem from the liberal definition of liberty. First of all, liberalism breaks liberty down to the individual. That the individual is free if he's able to pursue his own interests without harming others. But in truth, liberty is collective, because in order for an individual to feel in place and content in wider society, he needs a group of people that he feels he is part of and who share his sense of normalcy. The collective of people have liberty if they're able to live in accordance to their own customs. Liberty, according to John Stuart Mill, is universal, that if a society holds liberal values, all within it have liberty. But this isn't the case in the real world, because different people will feel a differing degree of liberty in any given society depending on the extent to which they feel at home in said society. This is why the more homogeneous a country is culturally, religiously, and ethnically, the more free it will feel for its inhabitants. For example, a Polish person will feel most at liberty living with other Poles who uphold the same norms as him. That same Polish person wouldn't feel the same in Algeria, regardless of whether or not Algeria had a liberal constitution. Because the sense of normalcy really comes from fitting in with the people around you. Homogeneity makes it easier for a polity to uphold the cultural values of its citizens. But multiculturalism causes problems to arise because one policy will make one group feel more at liberty and another group at less. John Stuart Mill warns of the tyranny of the majority and calls for tolerance, but is that really what people want? I tend to think people don't want to be tolerant, and given the choice, they'd prefer their own group's norms to have as much influence as possible. So tolerance doesn't create liberty. In an attempt to satisfy everyone, by forcing everyone to live together and to be tolerant of each other, it creates a situation that satisfies no one. And it's even worse as multiculturalism is actually practiced in the Western world today, where Europeans have to be tolerant towards everyone else, but they don't have to be tolerant towards us. Instead, liberty can be best achieved by allowing for self-determination so people can live under the customs and in the community they please. Mill says that the wider society should not concern itself with issues of morality, and simply offensive behavior should not be punished. But in order for a strong social order in which people feel comfortable to survive, standards must be enforced. Devin Stack of Blackpill did a great stream on his channel about imposing cost. On his stream, he discussed a photo taken from the 1970s of a man walking on a beach wearing a t-shirt that read "fuck off" on it. Devin Stack said that as soon as we were willing to accept someone wearing that t-shirt in public, we were lost as a society. He said that that one guy's individual liberty to wear that t-shirt imposed a cost on all the people around him. Parents would have to explain what the t-shirt meant to their children, or just regular adults would have their walk on the beach disrupted. He then pointed out that if someone had worn that same t-shirt in the 1940s, they would have been punished. He could have been fined by the police or just told off by an old woman. And if he was one of these libertarian types who sneers at any standards whatsoever and he gave the old woman lip, a man would step in and he'd have some real trouble on his hands. It could end in him getting socked in the face. The cost would have been imposed on him for wearing that shirt. By giving the individual freedom to do whatever they want, you can't have the social cohesion in which the wider public feels free. There needs to be standards. Some people will say, it's just a shirt, why does it matter? But as Devin Stack pointed out, once you're unwilling to enforce your standards, people will get away with even worse behavior. That's how you go from allowing people to just wear whatever offensive clothing they want to transgenderism being forced upon children today. So liberty is not the freedom to do, but the freedom to be. But I'd take that a step further and say it's not only the freedom to be, but also the freedom to become. The liberal conception of liberty abdicates the individual's responsibility to wider society, that they can't be expected to give something to a greater collective. While Mill does believe that people should be held accountable for failing to uphold their responsibility to others, he only holds them accountable to other individuals who have been directly impacted, but not the wider society as a whole. But an individual, as a part of a larger collective, is responsible to that group as a whole. And that responsibility is not enslaving, but fulfilling for people. For example, if you've ever been unemployed for any extended period of time and had all the free time in the world to do whatever you want, you'll know that it's not a liberating experience, it's a depressing one. People feel a lot more content when they're being productive. Even people who have made all the money they need in life will continue to work on new projects because even if you have all the resources to do so, simply pursuing individual gluttonous desires does not lead to a fulfilling life. As Maslow's hierarchy of needs suggests, people long to become self-actualized, to be the best that they can be. So rather than this liberal notion that liberty means freedom to do, I subscribe to the idea that Aristotle put forth that liberty is the freedom to become excellent. And that too extends beyond the individual. People want responsibility to something greater than themselves. That could be to a family, a community, a nation, or a god. Working toward a higher good is far more fulfilling than working for one's own individual desires. The liberal goal of attaining the maximum freedom for the individual in reality leads to an empty and nihilistic life. True fulfillment comes from pursuing something transcendental, and a society in which one has the opportunity to do so is far freer. I discussed this in my review of the film Wall-E. The film shows a world which takes the liberal conception of liberty to its logical conclusion, where people are free to pursue constant stimulation with no inhibitions. The film demonstrates well how this is not a free existence but an enslaving one, and that the freedom to pursue something of value beyond the material is far more rewarding. One of the major flaws of the liberal conception of liberty is conflating the use of government power with tyranny and limited government with liberty. Government really is just a reality of any stable polity, and it can be used as a tool to uphold order and maintain liberty. For example, anyone who's not some ANCAP would agree that if a country was invaded, the state should have the right to use its armed forces to defend its territories from invaders. Also, that men would have a collective responsibility which supersedes their individualism to join the armed forces and defend their land. Almost all classic liberals and libertarians would agree that this is a legitimate use of government power. People don't have liberty if they're being invaded. Well, what if we take that principle beyond the most extreme example of a foreign invasion and apply it to upholding the order under which liberty exists? In that context, the use of power, be it governmental or non-governmental, is legitimate and not a violation of freedom. So using power against someone who wishes to undermine the society and create disorder is just as legitimate as using the armed forces to fend off invaders. So what is the appropriate use of state power? Where do you draw the line? First of all, the foundations of the polity must be held as the absolute good, not some abstract set of liberal values. So the first priority of the nation-state should be the well-being of the nation, meaning the definable group of people. This also includes their culture, spirituality, and the social order under which they flourish, as this is necessary to the health of the collective. Upholding this is upholding their liberty. Now let's apply that to the reality which we live under today. The liberal misconception that tyranny can only come from the government and that limiting the government always increases liberty is a fatal flaw. Because what happens when the tyranny doesn't primarily come from the government, but from the private sector? When Goldman Sachs starts making policies based on intersectionality, or when Amazon begins turning anti-white murder fantasies into TV series. Today, private media, post-secondary education institutions, corporations, NGOs, and finance are all colluding to push cultural Marxism. We're in the era of woke capital, and the most effective way to counter the tyranny of infinite money power is through the force of the state. Today, using power against woke capital is the only way to regain our liberty. For example, in a European nation-state, funding and propagating critical race theory should be banned, because a nation-state should be run for the benefit of its core population and committed to upholding their liberty. Ideas like critical race theory and white privilege are based on lies and entirely designed to displace and subjugate people of European descent. Hence, in order to maintain liberty, critical race theory and policies based on it, such as affirmative action, must be barred from all institutions of power. And these university courses indoctrinating people should be shut down. The same goes for these media corporations which promote hateful and blatantly false narratives in order to advance the anti-white agenda. They are clearly hostile towards the core white population of Western nations, so they should not be tolerated. Allowing them to propagate outright lies under the liberal guise of free speech is not liberty, it's a threat to liberty. A healthy social order is also essential for upholding liberty. Things like radical feminism and the LGBT agenda, which are likewise based on lies, are entirely meant to destroy the healthy gender dynamic and the family. Thus, promoting and funding them should be banned as well. So promoting transgenderism to children, or adults for that matter, or these gender studies courses should be shut down. Breaking down human categories through social engineering does not make people more free. They feel free under a more natural order, so there's no reason to tolerate deliberately destructive ideologies. There are actually several successful examples of this being done in Eastern Europe. Poland, Russia, and Hungary have all crushed George Soros's Open Society Foundation's operations within their jurisdictions. So in those countries, he's no longer able to fund or promote open borders or cultural Marxism. And this is absolutely the right thing to do. Shutting down someone whose entire goal is to undermine and destroy your society is not a violation of liberty. On the contrary, it is defending liberty. Now, I'm aware that we can't simply shut down the left in the West today. These things are far more embedded than they are in the East, and the governments are controlled by either the left or by the phony right. But the first step to actually making change is abandoning liberalism's false conception of liberty as simply an absence of authority, and recognize that in order to have liberty, you need authority on your side. The next step would be to actually start using the power that we do have. A good example of the right actually using power is the Second Amendment sanctuaries in the US, where sheriff's departments have just said they won't enforce certain gun control laws. This makes the progressive legislation essentially ineffective. And that isn't really the result of the Second Amendment, because you just need one liberal judge to approve the legislation. It's the result of right-wingers having institutional power within the sheriff's departments. That's the right actually using power, and we need more of it. What I'd like to see in the future is the formation of right-wing interest groups, like a white version of the ADL. Groups that can engage in legal battles to punish and hopefully shut down things like anti-white media narratives or affirmative action. This is how we can begin to push back against the tyranny of woke politics. Now, I'll respond to a few objections to my own conception of liberty and my endorsement of the use of power that I know I'm going to receive from libertarians and classic liberals. First of all, they often use the argument that banning things doesn't work. This is just flat out wrong. Banning things absolutely does work. It might not work 100%, but it greatly reduces its prevalence. For example, my point about banning critical race theory from institutions. What libertarians or classic liberals often say is that banning an idea makes it more prevalent because it can't be debunked by facts, logic, and reason in the marketplace of ideas. However, there's plenty of research into human biodiversity, or race realism as it's sometimes known. There is very strong evidence to suggest that intelligence to a large part is heritable and not evenly distributed among different populations. And we've known this for decades. But despite all the evidence we have, the left has worked relentlessly to bar race realism from influential institutions and to punish people like Charles Murray, Arthur Jensen, or James Watson for wrongthink. And it's worked. All policies in the West today are based on egalitarianism. To illustrate this point even further, the left is able to do the same thing with gender. As insane as it sounds, they've made it so that policy today is based on the idea that gender doesn't exist. So it is very possible to prevent ideas you don't want in the discourse from gaining any influence. The difference is that the study of HBD is genuine scientific inquiry, while critical race theory is just a lie designed solely to advance a hostile agenda. For a more in-depth description of this, I'll link you to a video by Settlers Lament debunking the liberal lie that banning things doesn't work as it attains to vices. Secondly, they'll say you can't legislate morality. This is also a lie. Morality has always influenced legislation. Traditional Christian morality was legislated for, even if it wasn't explicitly religious, up until the last few decades. And today, the left is legislating for its own morality. They've just replaced legislation for traditional morality with the new morality of political correctness, legislating against the secular sins of racism, sexism, and homophobia. I'll also get the accusation that I want to do the exact same thing that the left does. This usually comes from the anti-SJW, socially liberal centrist crowd. They only oppose the SJWs, as they call them, on the grounds that they want to tell people what to do. But they'll say that I want to tell people what to do as well, so I must be a right-wing SJW. They scoff at any kind of standards that are imposed by any authority, regardless of the nature of it. Their smug and obnoxious irony on the internet might get a bunch of upvotes from 14-year-old boys playing Call of Duty in their parents' basements. But when this mindset is taken into the real world, this absolute libertine rejection of any standards whatsoever manifests itself as the overweight neckbeard dancing naked on the stage at the Libertarian Party National Convention. In the real world, people want respectability. They hold a set of standards of decency that they expect others around them to follow. That's not the same as political correctness, which is ideological control designed to advance an anti-white agenda. But someone who just disregards any standards and did whatever they wanted would be rejected by those around them. Having a set of standards which people are pressured to uphold is not a violation of liberty. On the contrary, people feel more comfortable and free when these standards are upheld. I'll link you to a video by Morgoth on the skeptics which illustrates this well. Lastly, I'll respond to the accusation that such a social order like the one I'm suggesting would be just as controlling as the left is today. First, being in favor of a powerful state doesn't necessarily mean it has to be a big state. It doesn't mean the government would need to regulate every aspect of people's lives. It just means that the government would act against hostile elements. Secondly, in a more stable, socially conservative order, the government or other institutions wouldn't need to step in and regulate people's lives, because right-wing ideas are more in line with the natural order, meaning they wouldn't need to be heavily enforced by institutional power. Hierarchies naturally develop. Egalitarianism is unnatural and requires institutional force to artificially manufacture. So right-wing authoritarianism, if you even want to call it that, usually only requires the use of power to keep harmful elements out of a stable and healthy society, while left-wing authoritarianism needs to control every aspect of people's lives in order to change human nature and socially engineer equality. For example, someone living under a European monarchy in the 19th century would rarely, if ever, interact with the government in their entire lives. Far less than they would today. But they were very socially conservative societies, because traditional values don't require social engineering. They emerge under natural hierarchies. The idea of something like multiculturalism or feminism existing in a rural 19th century European town is unfathomable. How could you possibly convince someone back then that gender doesn't exist? So they had a stable, natural order which didn't require constant regulation. State force was not omnipresent in old European monarchies. But if someone tried to start a porn industry or tried to promote a hostile ideology like Marxism or anarchism, the government would step in and stop them. To uphold order, they wouldn't have been afraid of using state power if necessary. Now contrast that with a modern progressive city. There are regulations everywhere to be seen. There are rules upon rules about how you can live your life. Social progressivism is created by manufacturing equality. It's through things like diversity initiatives, university courses, employee workshops, and mass media. And of course, controlling information and censoring dissenting ideas. All of this stuff is only possible due to material decadence, and it needs to be forced by institutions of power. They need to take a heavy-handed approach and regulate every aspect of people's lives because progressivism is contrary to human nature. Enforcing a left-wing social order requires a far greater assertion of power than enforcing a right-wing one. And just so someone doesn't comment this, I'm not suggesting going back to the 19th century because that's impossible. The point is that social conservatism is the human norm and emerges in the absence of egalitarian conditioning. It's the same case today. Rural areas are almost always more conservative than urban ones. In conclusion, liberty does not come from abstract principles. It's shared collectively, not enjoyed individually, and it's not synonymous with a lack of government power. Liberty is not the freedom to do. Liberty is the freedom to be and the freedom to become. Liberty requires order. People feel free when they live in a cohesive society in which they feel at home and their morals and customs are upheld. Lack of duty and responsibility does not result in freedom. It results in emptiness. People feel more fulfilled when they have responsibilities to their family, nation, or religion. This is the freedom to become self-actualized, and liberty must be defended. Just like a military is necessary to defend against foreign invasions, power, both governmental and non-governmental, must work to uphold a healthy and stable social order and remove harmful elements. You can only have liberty if power is on your side. Lack of authority doesn't create liberty. Loyalty of authority creates liberty. If you enjoyed this video, please like, share, and subscribe, and follow me on Twitter. If you'd like to support my channel, you can on either Patreon or PayPal. And if you'd like to join my Discord community, you can do that too. All links are down below. Thank you for listening. Till next time, endeavor.